Do supply chain algorithms have anything to teach us about cybersecurity ones?
So Manny, looks like you've got sort of a different story today about large corporations, algorithms, and COVID-19.
Yeah, so you are absolutely correct, Matt. So this story, although from the surface does look like it's a little out of sorts and something that we normally wouldn't talk about, what sort of caught my eye on this story was sort of it talking about algorithms. So I read through the story, and the story really talks about algorithms in the sense of how companies are using them, very specific to sort of suppliers. And how suppliers are using these algorithms to predict, the things that they need to order, right? So in general, algorithms, I guess I should explain, algorithms for folks that don't know are, basically logic that tries to predict some sort of future state, right? And then helps you make decisions based on those predictions, right? So a lot of companies out there, suppliers are using these things, big, huge distribution companies, right? Big shops are using these algorithms to decide on how to do things like ordering stuff, checking in inventory levels, purchasing trends, even things like how to do discounts, right? So when should I offer a discount to lower the supply of something, or even when to order some new supplies, right? So algorithms are constantly in the background sort of running the operations for a lot of these big, huge companies, specifically for this particular article, like supply chains. But the reason why I picked this was algorithms obviously are used in a lot of different places. So in the security world, algorithms are also used, right? So in our line of work, we're using algorithms all the time to do these sort of same type of predictions. And we're doing predictions for all sorts of different types of stuff, right? So when I saw this story, that's kind of where I wanted to spin this. And I was hoping that we could sort of talk on this a little bit in terms of algorithms and how they're used in cybersecurity. And really why I wanted to bring up algorithms specifically here is because with the disruption right now of COVID-19 and the pandemic, the algorithms that we have running today are, I don't want to say struggling, but they are certainly now sort of trying to adjust for the different ways in which we are working. So take, for example, our move for a lot of workforce in sort of our line of work to work from home. So working from home is now taking a whole bunch of people who are normally connecting to corporate networks, being directly connected to these corporate networks to now those folks remoting into the network. So but the algorithms that we've written from a security perspective to watch the network, to look for anomalies on the network, have now had to shift over to looking at sort of what does it now look like. Now we have connections to the networks where we didn't normally, or at least at the levels that we have today or had before, we're seeing completely different levels. That's really what I wanted to sort of talk about here. Not so much what this particular article, but sort of spin it on its head and talk about how this is actually affecting security-based, algorithms. So things like user behavior, right? So user behavior is looking at things like how a particular person behaves on a network, right? So when we look at user behavior today, it's taking a whole bunch of different factors into play when it runs it through its algorithm, right? It's this magic black box that it has that runs through, and it looks at everybody's traffic or particular individual's traffic and tries to map that traffic out. And then over time, it takes that mapping and it keeps like putting that mapping against what the traffic looks like today and seeing if there's any kind of anomaly in that, right? And so as soon as it detects some sort of anomaly in that traffic for an individual, it'll flag something and say, hey, Jim is doing something that we haven't seen Jim do before, right? So those algorithms that we have today, now because of this massive change, right? And we're seeing massive changes in the way that people are connecting to networks. So these algorithms have now had to shift. And what that means for us today is that, we're now, like 6 weeks into this thing. The algorithms have had to shift today to take into consideration these new changes. But in that shift, what I think we've been seeing is a ton of false positives that are coming out of these particular algorithms, right? So these algorithms are now sort of saying that there's a problem because I see some different trend that didn't exist last week, last month, certainly last year, right? And so now it's taking it into these engines that are trying to create the models for individuals, for individuals, for assets on your network, right? For different volumetric trends across your network. So all these things now are sort of shifting, right? So you're now seeing a lot more remote access in. You're seeing more different people that are connecting to the network from different methods, right? So folks who are connecting directly in through your VPNs, people who are sort of connecting up through private VPNs, right? Before they connect up to your network. So these are all different changes that our algorithms now have to take into consideration. And today, probably creating a whole bunch of false positives that you now have to go through as a security analyst and clear through to say, oh, no, that's normal now because we've now had this shift. That becomes the norm, which also means that as we hopefully come out of this thing, we're also going to see another shift back the other way, right? So as the workforce starts to go back into offices and this thing starts to shift, right, those algorithms are going to have to now reshift to figure out what that pattern now looks like as it's changing back, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to, bring up and talk about on this one and what really caught my eye on this one.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point because, you can set alarms for, people who only work in the office. You set an alarm if they're working at 9 o'clock at night or something. Well, if that person is now working from home and they've got to homeschool the kids during the day, they may be working at 9 o'clock at night on a regular basis because that's when they can get in and do, get to their email and do all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. And you already mentioned all kinds of people who never used to use the VPN before are now having to use VPN to get in because they're having to work from home. So yeah, that's...
Or you come up against policy violations where people just haven't interacted with the remote systems before. Like they don't know what is and what isn't acceptable. Granted, maybe there was some training that they took and they forgot, but you have people who are doing stuff. It's like, oh my goodness, how could he possibly not know? Well, this is his first time using the VPN. I
Right.
don't really blame him. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting little side things that are coming up for sure. Different things that human beings are doing that we hadn't expected because we had all these assumptions around the way that they're supposed to work in a pre-COVID environment.
We thought we needed this much capacity, and now all of a sudden, because everybody is forced to behave differently, we need more capacity over here and maybe less over here for the time being, at least.
Yeah, and to go along with capacity, software licensing. Like if you're paying for seat licenses for a remote access solution or a two-factor authentication solution, well, you have to quickly get a hold of licenses. So yeah.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah, that's another one of those things that's just a side effect of all this stuff, right? You certainly wouldn't have thought about that. You sort of think about the typical scenarios that you have. It's like, okay, yeah, I know I'm going to have this whole amount of workforce that moves remotely. So I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to figure out, do I, again, like Jim said, do I have the capacity, right, on the network? Do I have capacity on those edge devices to get those people in and connected up to the network? But, take it one step further and you just have to start talking about like licensing. Like, so folks could be starting to wheel this thing up and then all of a sudden at the last minute go, oh man, like why is, why did a whole thousands of people can't connect? Oh, well, because your license is, wasn't good for, for that amount of people connecting up. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, this would have been a great conversation to have at the start of the pandemic.
Well, as I said, I think this will be a conversation that I think will be relevant. It's a little late for the beginning of it, but I think it's going to be relevant again when things go back to normal. It's also going to be one of those things that shift back, right? And so if you've shifted things over to account for the pandemic conditions, you're going to have to also put something into play to ensure that when things go back to normal, you're also putting other things back to normal as well, right? So and again, some of those algorithms are going to potentially have trouble adjusting to that, but again, I think there's some things that could be done to help with that adjustment now that we've seen what has happened with those things and what we need to adjust now that we're in the middle of it. Perhaps it's a little bit easier to adjust once it goes back to normal, but I think it's all things that will have to be taken into consideration.
This is exactly what the whole field of disaster recovery and business continuity are all about, is how to accommodate these things and keep the business running. And so we need to definitely be learning the lessons from this one.